A sudden roar startled Francis Bacon out of his thoughts, making him jump, his shoes actually leaving the ground. He glanced to either side, hoping no one had seen him. Of course, the street was empty. The roar came from the cheers rising from the tilt-yard where all of London celebrated Queen's Day with jousting and pageants. The world and his wife were there today, including everyone who mattered at court. Everyone, therefore, except him. He didn't know why he'd come down to Westminster. He should have stayed in his chambers at Gray's, reading in the blissful peace of the deserted inn. He needed exercise, he'd said to himself. Stretch his legs, catch a breath of air. Once he was out, he thought he might drop by Burghley House in hopes of gaining a moment with his uncle, the Lord Treasurer and Her Majesty's most indispensable counsellor. He knew his lordship would not be at the tilt-yard. He rarely took time off from work and disliked noisy spectacles. Francis didn't much care for them either. Sweaty people, filthy grounds, ear-splitting roars like the one that had just startled him. Dreadful. He shuddered to think of it. His uncle had refused to see him. The secretary offered a transparent excuse about heaps of letters and an aching head. One did not need the deductive gifts of a Bacon to recognize that he was persona non grata at Burghley House as well. All he'd done was have an idea, a perfectly reasonable idea for reforming the English common law, and mention it here and there. He was born to have ideas. He'd been told as much from infancy. But his proposal had caused a bit of a stir. The Queen didn't like controversy among her courtiers, so she'd banished him until further notice. The punishment far exceeded the crime, but to whom might one complain? On a sort of self-flagellatory whim, he walked down the Strand to Whitehall, thinking of popping up to his friend Henry Percy's to borrow a book. He changed his mind on the very threshold, wavering 2 steps forward, 2 back, taking another slow step forward. Then he turned and walked quickly away with downcast eyes. He knew, and everyone would know he knew, that banishment from court meant no visiting of friends who were visiting at court. What had he been thinking? He'd taken a risk just passing through the King Street gate. He should go back to his chambers at once and stay there. He walked swiftly past the palace and turned into the Privy Garden to get off the main street. If German tourists were allowed to stroll here at their pleasure, then surely so should he be. He inhaled deeply as he hurried through the maze of tall yews, appreciating their wholesome fragrance to bolster his courage until he reached the narrow street on the other side. Now he was officially outside the palace grounds. Safe. Francis exhaled a sigh of relief and directed his steps towards the Westminster Wharf. He'd catch the wherry back to the Temple Stair and avoid the whole palace area until he'd been restored to the Queen's good graces. The lanes south of the palace formed another maze, with narrow alleys winding between tightly packed houses, darkened by the overhanging upper stories. The short November day was drawing down. Rows of puffball clouds streamed across the sky, casting confusing shadows across timbered walls. But Francis knew Westminster like he knew his Bible. He could walk it blindfolded. He turned a sharp corner and stumbled onto a soft mass. Backing up, looking down, a gasp of horror choked his throat. The mass was a man. Dead, sprawled across the middle of the lane in a pool of wet dirt. Wet with blood which Francis had walked right into. If he'd been paying attention, he would have smelled it first. The tang of fresh blood was unmistakable. He backed off a few paces and checked his boots. A thoughtless act he immediately repented. The poor man, whoever he was, deserved his first consideration. Francis took a few breaths, patting himself on the chest to calm his heart, his gaze averted toward the pink plaster wall beside him. He'd been to funerals, but he'd never seen a corpse, much less nearly trampled one in the open street. He steeled himself to take another look. He avoided the face at first, easing himself into the odious duty.